If you're watching this right now, your brain has already detected a pattern that most people will never consciously recognize. This isn't about belief. It's about a cognitive threshold that, once crossed, changes how you experience literally everything. You've probably noticed the early signs without having language for them. Old motivations feeling hollow, conversation seeming thinner, time behaving strangely. That isn't confusion. That's your system upgrading. Now I'm going to do this the matrix of knowledge way. No mystical hype. No you're chosen. No overnight miracle promises. Just a clean framework for what's happening inside your awareness and why it matters. If you felt something change lately that you can't fully explain, keep that in the back of your mind while you listen, because by the end, you'll have a name for it. Here's what's happening. Human consciousness operates in layers. Most people live their entire lives inside what I'll call the reactive layer. Something happens, you interpret it through your past, attach emotion to that interpretation, and then respond as if your interpretation is reality. It happens so fast, you don't even notice there were steps. You just feel like life is a certain way, and you're responding normally. But then for some people, something changes. Not through some dramatic spiritual event necessarily. Not through a lightning bolt of enlightenment, but through a kind of maturation of awareness that makes the mechanism visible. It's like you suddenly notice the frame around the picture. You've been staring at the picture your whole life. And then one day, you see the frame. And once you see the frame, you can't unsee it. Your relationship with your own thoughts changes. This is the recognition point, and most people cross it without realizing it's happened. A lot of people assume that when they start feeling disinterested in drama, less reactive, less emotionally hooked, it means they're depressed or losing passion. But what if it's the opposite? What if the reason things feel hollow is because your consciousness is becoming more efficient? What if the craving for noise is fading because your system can't tolerate low-quality input the same way anymore? Let's get practical. Your brain is a prediction machine. It is constantly scanning for patterns and trying to anticipate what happens next based on what happened before. That's not a flaw. That's intelligence. It helps you survive. But it has a side effect. You end up living slightly in the past and slightly in the future, rarely fully in the present. You're remembering, anticipating, rehearsing, comparing, managing how you're perceived, managing what you should be feeling. Your attention becomes fragmented, and fragmentation costs energy. It's like running multiple programs in the background on a computer. The screen still works, but everything slows down. You're tired not because life is impossible, but because your system is running too many unnecessary processes. Now imagine something changes. Those background processes start shutting down, not because you force them, but because your system recognizes they're inefficient. Suddenly, you have processing power you forgot you had. You become more present. Your mind quiets. Your attention feels sharper. And here's the key. It doesn't feel like you gained something. It feels like you stopped bleeding energy. That's the threshold. The biggest visible change is the gap between stimulus and response. In the reactive layer, something happens. You interpret it. You feel something about the interpretation. You identify with the feeling. Then you respond from that identity. This whole chain can happen in seconds, but each link adds distortion. By the time you respond, you're often responding to your internal story, not to the actual event. At the recognition point, you start noticing that gap. It's subtle at first, but it changes everything. Because once you can see the gap, you're no longer completely fused with your reaction. Someone criticizes your work. In the reactive layer, you hear it, interpret it as an attack, feel threatened, identify as being disrespected, then respond defensively, instantly. It feels justified. It feels like you're reacting to reality. But at the recognition point, there's a pause. Not forced, natural. In that pause, you notice the interpretation forming. You notice the emotional charge building. And because you notice it, you're not fully trapped inside it. You might still feel defensive, but you also see the defensiveness as a reaction, rather than as truth. And that gives you options. You can respond to the content of the criticism instead of the emotional story around it. That sounds small. It's not. That single pattern applies to desire, fear, ambition, relationships, addiction, procrastination, everything. This is the root mechanism behind 90% of human suffering. Not pain itself, but identification with the story about pain. From a neuroscience perspective, there's a simple way to describe why this works. The brain tries to reduce prediction error. When reality doesn't match your expectations, your system experiences it as an error signal. It's uncomfortable. It motivates you to either change reality or change your interpretation so you can feel consistent again. That's why cognitive dissonance feels like pressure in your body. Your system wants closure. At the recognition point, your self-concept becomes less rigid, so prediction errors don't threaten you as much. You're less identified with your expectations. That means the world feels less threatening. Things can be different without causing an existential crisis. Life can surprise you without breaking you. This flexibility is rare and extremely valuable, because reality is unpredictable by nature. Now let's correct a common misunderstanding. This is not about becoming emotionless. You still feel everything: joy, sadness, anger, love. The difference is that feelings move through you more cleanly. They arise, peak, resolve. They don't automatically become a story you carry for weeks. Think of it like weather moving through a landscape versus weather getting trapped in a valley. Same weather, different experience. And this is where a lot of spiritual content gets it wrong. It frames the shift as transcendence, as rising above being human. That's not what happens. You don't become less human. You become more inhabitable. You stop wasting half your energy managing your self-image and defending your interpretations. That energy becomes available for real life. So what does this look like on the ground? Decision-making becomes easier. Not because you suddenly know the perfect answer to everything, but because you stop needing every choice to validate your identity. When you're heavily identified with your self-concept, every decision becomes a referendum on who you are. Should I take this job? What does it say about my ambition, my intelligence, my worth? Every choice becomes a performance. When recognition stabilizes, decisions become more pragmatic. Does this align with my values and my actual needs? Does it expand me or contract me? Does it create clarity or chaos? Cleaner questions, cleaner answers. Relationships become more honest. This can be uncomfortable. When you stop performing, You stop saying what you think people want to hear. You stop pretending interest. You stop maintaining dynamics purely out of guilt, fear, or habit. This doesn't make you cruel. It makes you real. Some relationships won't survive that shift, especially relationships built on mutual performance, shared complaints, or constant emotional trading. But the relationships that remain become stronger because they're based on presence instead of choreography. Ambition changes flavor. You don't lose goals. You stop needing achievement to prove something about your worth. Success becomes expression rather than validation. And paradoxically, outcomes often improve because you're not sabotaging yourself with performance anxiety, fear of failure, and desperation for approval. You just do the work. Suffering decreases, but in a precise way. Pain still happens. Loss still happens. Difficulty still happens. What decreases is the secondary suffering, the extra suffering created by resistance, rumination, self-judgment, and identity collapse. You can be sad without believing you're broken. You can fail without believing you're worthless. The event happens, then it passes, leaving less residue. And here's the big one. Especially for matrix of knowledge viewers, you become harder to manipulate. Not because you become cynical, but because you can see the mechanisms that manipulation relies on. Marketing language that used to create desire becomes visible as technique. Social pressure becomes visible as pressure. Fear-based messaging becomes visible as fear. And once you can see a tactic clearly, it stops working the same way. That has enormous implications in a world designed to capture and monetize your attention. Most people don't realize how engineered modern life is. Notifications, outrage cycles, constant urgency, identity-based tribalism. These are not random cultural trends. They are systems, and they work by keeping you reactive, because a reactive mind is predictable, and a predictable mind is controllable. Recognition breaks predictability. Now let's clear up a few misconceptions that keep people confused. First, people expect this shift to be dramatic. Fireworks, a peak experience, a sudden moment of awakening. For most people, it's not like that. It's more like gradually putting on a new prescription in your glasses. You don't notice the change instantly. Then one day you realize you've been seeing differently for weeks. Second, people assume it's permanent. It's not. You can absolutely get pulled back into reactive loops. The difference is that now, part of you can see it happening. There's a dual awareness. You're in the emotion, but you can also observe the emotion. And that observing part gives you a choice, even if you don't always take it. Third, people turn it into a superiority complex. They start identifying as someone who sees what others don't. That's a trap. The moment you build an identity around being awakened, you've created a more sophisticated ego structure, and you're back in the same mechanism of identification and defense. The recognition point isn't about being special. It's about being ordinary in a deeper way, living without the constant need to be someone else. Fourth, people think it solves all problems. It doesn't. You still have practical challenges: money, health, relationships, responsibilities. What changes is how much psychological drama you add on top of those challenges. Problems become solvable because you're not drowning in the story about the problem. Fifth, people think it ends growth. It usually starts real growth because you can learn without your identity being threatened. You can receive feedback without treating it as an attack. You can acknowledge limitations without collapsing into shame. That's how sustainable development actually happens. So how does someone reach this recognition point? There isn't one formula, but there are patterns. Usually there's a period of productive frustration. You've tried the conventional approaches, and they're not working. You've read, applied, adjusted, repeated, and you keep returning to the same loops. That frustration matters because it undermines your faith in your old framework. You start suspecting that the way you're thinking is part of the problem. Then comes a moment of genuine not knowing, not performative humility, real surrender. Your usual mental strategies fail. You stop trying to brute force understanding, and in that space, something else can emerge. Often you're exposed to perspectives that challenge your assumptions about consciousness. Books, conversations, personal experiences, anything that cracks certainty and creates flexibility. And the crucial piece, you stop trying to change your experience and start being willing to experience what's actually happening. That sounds simple, but it's profound. Most people spend their lives fighting reality. They think they should be happier, more motivated, less anxious, more certain. That constant should creates internal warfare. When you stop fighting what is and become curious about it, something relaxes. And in that relaxation, recognition becomes possible. Also, cognitive noise matters. Many people can't access this simply because they're overstimulated. Too much scrolling, too much news, too much drama, too much external input. Not because the world is evil, but because the nervous system needs space to settle. When your internal waters are constantly stirred, you can't see the bottom. Some people find meditation helpful. Some find it through therapy. Some through crisis. Some through creative work. The path varies. What seems consistent is willingness to question certainty and tolerate uncertainty without rushing to comfortable answers. And here's the important part. You can't force it. The moment you try to achieve recognition, you've created a new identity, the person trying to become enlightened. That identity will defend itself just like every other identity. Recognition emerges when conditions are right. What you can do is create conditions that make it more likely. Reduce unnecessary noise. Practice noticing thoughts instead of being consumed by them. Be willing to be wrong. Stay curious instead of defensive, and simplify what doesn't matter. So what is it like when this stabilizes? There's a baseline okayness that becomes more available. Not constant happiness, but a sense that beneath everything, stress, sadness, uncertainty, there's ground. A stability that doesn't need you to pretend. Time changes. The future stops feeling like the only place where life begins. The present stops feeling like a hallway you run through to get somewhere else. And paradoxically, when you stop living for the future, you tend to create a better future. Because you're making choices from clarity rather than anxiety. Your relationship to your mind changes. Thoughts still arise. Emotions still emerge, but they're less defining. They're weather patterns moving through awareness rather than the definition of who you are. You can think without being consumed by thought. You can feel without being overwhelmed by feeling. You become more comfortable with paradox. You can hold multiple perspectives without needing to collapse them into one correct view. You can change your mind without it being a crisis. You can be uncertain without panic. You become less reactive to other people's states. Someone is angry. and you can see it as their anger without absorbing it as your identity. Someone is in pain, and you can be present without drowning. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you capable. Your life simplifies naturally. You let go of unnecessary commitments. You stop maintaining things out of guilt. You stop doing social performance. What remains is what actually matters. And because you're clearer about what matters, you can invest in it fully, and life becomes more vivid. Not because reality changed, but because your aperture opened. Simple pleasures become satisfying. Conversations become more interesting. Colors feel sharper. You're here. Now everything I've said can sound abstract if you only hear it as concepts. The real confirmation comes from your own experience. If this resonated, it's probably because you've already noticed pieces of it. You've felt the shift. You've sensed the gap. You've realized you're not reacting to reality. You're reacting to your interpretation of it. And if that's true, then you don't need to do anything dramatic after this video. You don't need a new identity. You don't need to announce your awakening. You just need to pay attention to one thing: the gap between what happens and what you think about what happens. That gap is where everything changes. Because the moment you can see the mechanism, you can work with it. You can notice when you're in reactive mode and when you're in recognition mode. You can choose moment by moment how you want to respond. And over time, that choice becomes less effortful because recognition becomes more default. If you want to engage with this, keep it simple. Over the next week, notice your reactions in real time, not to suppress them, not to judge them, but to see them. When you catch yourself getting pulled into drama, pause and ask, what is the story I'm telling myself right now? What is the emotion attached to it? Is it accurate or is it automatic? You don't need perfect answers. You just need honesty. That honesty is where real transformation begins. I wish you all the best. And until next time.